these ideas work for you, but not for this next generation. And literally, I was sitting at a table with a bunch of millennials who were writing down ideas for millennial youth ministry.
The Fresh Church Podcast.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Fresh Church Podcast. My question for you today is, what are we going to do to keep from losing our kids? Why does the church seem out of touch with what's going on in the lives of this next generation, this alpha generation? And what can we do to reach our kids and young families? So I visit one church, and half the congregation is over the age of 60. The pastor just turned 50 and is irritated by the fact that he keeps being called the young guy, because he is. I visited another church with a retiring pastor in his late 60s, and half of their church is under the age of 30. Wait, did you hear that? This old guy has a young church. What's the secret there? I visit a mega church, and they've got a great kids ministry. But as I look around, I don't see any parents. I don't see any young adults. I see grandparents bringing their grandkids to church. What happened to their parents? You know, every church I talk to is commenting about how youth ministry is hurting, and they've got every reason under the sun for it. Kids pastors keep asking, what do we do about behavioral issues and trying to keep the kids' attention? Pastors are trying more and more gimmicks of things they used to do to get people to come to church. The truth is, church attendance has dropped from the average person coming twice a month to once a month, maybe. I mean, I had coffee with a guy last week who told me he hasn't been back to church since churches were shut down a couple of years ago. He says he still tithes and he has a small group that he meets with once in a while, but he doesn't really see the purpose of going back to church. What are we missing? Well, the answer is pretty simple. 1, we don't know our audience. 2, we keep doing what we've always been doing. And 3, we need a new set of core values. Let's unpack that today. Let's talk about what that looks like. You see, when I started in family ministry, I asked God for a key verse for my life, for my ministry. And I found this verse in the book of Luke, reading about John the Baptist. In Luke chapter 3, verses 4-6, and this is a quotation from Isaiah that is referring to John's life as a representation of what he's going to do to prepare the way for Jesus. It says, "He is a voice shouting in the wilderness, 'Prepare the way for the Lord's coming. Clear the road for him. The valleys will be filled and the mountains and hills made level. The curves will be straightened and the rough places made smooth. And then all people will see the salvation sent from God.'" Prepare the way. That line jumped out to me, that my responsibility originally as a kids pastor, as a youth pastor, and family pastor, and even an executive pastor, is to prepare the way for people's hearts to be open, to find out what God's plan for their life is, to find out about his love and his desire for relationship. My job as a pastor is to prepare the way. And as I've even evolved farther in ministry, I've learned the importance of equipping and empowering volunteers and leaders. It's all part of that prepare the way, that his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's my job to prepare the way. And as I've lived this pastor the last 15 years, I discovered the Holy Spirit constantly giving me ideas to take all these crazy things that were out there and make it simple. So picture for a minute a construction project, because it's kind of what you see here. I mean, it says that clear the road for him. Picture a construction project. So you've got mountains and hills and low areas, and you've got crooked areas and rough areas, and you smooth it all out and you make a straight path. That's kind of what road construction does, right? I've always had a way of keeping things simple, explaining the Bible in a way that makes sense to the next generation. But part of that came from getting to know the next generation. Okay, you have to know how to communicate to them to make the path straight, to make it easy and understandable. So I'm a Gen Xer. I'm a young Gen Xer. That means I can communicate well to Gen Xers and some of the older millennials quite naturally, actually. But I found a lot of it is based because of things that we had in common, stuff you would watch on TV. So if I mention Michael Jordan or the TV show Friends, we've got an instant connection, right? Then comes along another generation. and another generation. Yeah, if I'm going to prepare the way for them, I've got to get to know about this next generation, or else I'm going to lose them. I have to find out what they like and don't like. I have to find out what sayings aren't said anymore, what shows aren't discussed anymore. I can't reference things from the 60s and 70s and think this younger generation is going to get it. They're not. So you have to know that if you're a millennial, you love reality TV. Remember, that's when American Idol and Survivor and all these great reality shows were out there. If you're a Gen Zer, you love YouTube and social media. If you're part of Gen Alpha, you've probably never watched a live television show in your life. Everything's on demand. You have no idea what the sentence "after these messages" means because you've never experienced that. So if we're going to reach this next generation, we need to know this generation. See, whatever you may know about millennials, about Gen Z, about Alpha generation, that all went out the window after 2020. Life changed. Trauma happened. You need to know everything you can about this generation, but please don't reference things written before that date, because where they're at right now is different. We live in a different world. So let's start talking about this Alpha generation. Now, an Alpha generation technically is defined as somebody who's been born since 2010 up through, they're projecting probably 2025. So that means that the current kids that we have, our preschool, our elementary ministries, our middle school ministries are made up of this Alpha generation. You do realize within a couple of years, all of the minors in your church, anybody under the age of 18, is going to be part of this generation. I think we better get to know them, right? So let's look at some of the characteristics of this Alpha generation. Let's get to know them a little bit. So the Alpha generation can be defined as things that are important to them as diversity and inclusion. Alphas are growing up in a more diverse world. They place a high value on inclusivity, the acceptance of other people from different backgrounds and cultures and identities. We live in a different world now, and the diversity and inclusion is a big deal to them. Number 2, sustainability. With a strong emphasis on environmental issues and climate change, Alphas developed a value for sustainability and conservation. Honestly, a lot of Alphas don't think they're going to live to have their own kids. They think the world is coming to an end. So they're going to do things that are more environmentally conscious. They'll begin to be an advocate for eco-friendly practices. Already in their minds, they're pushing for eco-friendly things. If you talk to a younger child, they don't understand why you'd want a gas-powered car when you could have electric. Why? Because they've been told it's eco-friendly. They look at the world that way. Number 3, for this Alpha generation, technology and innovation is an important part of who they are. I mean, they are true digital natives. Have you walked through a grocery store? I remember seeing a mother the other day who had her baby in a wrap around her, and she's holding her phone up, showing them a show. Now, this baby is like 6 months old, and she's watching YouTube on her mother's phone. Digital technology has been part of their life literally since they were born. So they embrace new technologies and advancements as they become available, and it'll keep becoming more and more available as technology continues to accelerate. Number 4, Alpha generation cares about education, and they're expected to value education and lifelong learning. They'll place a high importance on acquiring new skills and knowledge, given the rapidly changing technology landscape, and they're not going to do it through traditional venues. They're going to look at other ways that they can learn. Now, they may go to college, but they're going to learn a lot of stuff from being online. They've realized that knowledge goes beyond a certificate, and they're going to continue to be educated all that they can. Number 5, health and well-being. A focus on physical and mental health is important to the Alpha generation. They are being diagnosed with things like never before. They're using all kinds of different medicines, and they're aware of kids around them with the same kind of diagnosis. They are going to prioritize well practices. They're going to be open to new approaches to health and well-being. Health is going to be a constant part of their conversation. Number 6, global awareness. Alphas have an increased awareness of global issues and an interest in global cooperation. It's called the World Wide Web. It's the internet. It's all one big world now. They value a sense of global citizenship and understanding of international affairs. It's amazing when I talk to kids, they can tell me what's going on in the world. They know the headlines of what's occurring in other nations. They know what's happening. You need to be aware of that also. Number 7, community and social connection. While technology is a big part of their lives, alphas also value real-world connections and community involvement. They prioritize face-to-face interactions in addition to online relationships. Number 8, I love this one. Alpha generation focuses on creativity and individuality. Alphas place a high value on creativity, self-expression, individuality. They want to express themselves in different ways, and it needs to be unique to themselves. They seek opportunity to express themselves through art, media, and other creative outlets. I would not be surprised if this generation starts creating new types of art, new ways of expressing themselves. Even within the digital world, we're starting to see that. It's exciting what this looks like. Be prepared for a creative generation. Number 9, family and relationships. Family values continue to be an important part of this alpha generation. They place a strong emphasis on close relationships with their families and value traditional family structures. If you look at some of the previous generations, it was how quickly can we move away from mom and dad? Now you see generations want to move back to the towns they grew up in. These kids are realizing, I want a grandma and a grandpa in my life. I want uncles and aunts and cousins. I want family. And we might not know what their actual family itself might look like as far as will they get married, will they have kids, but they're going to want to have family around them. And then number 10, economic responsibility. And so growing up during times of economic uncertainties, we're pretty sure the alpha generation is going to develop a sense of economic responsibility and financial literacy. They seem to be more conscious of saving, investing, and financial planning. Even at elementary ages, they're starting to get it. So now let's shift gears and let's talk about reaching this alpha generation. I remember a couple of years ago, it was 2019. I was in a meeting as a family pastor, meeting with a bunch of different youth pastors, and they were talking about youth ministries and ways to engage the youth in the city. And they had a dream board. They were writing up all kinds of ideas of way to reach young people. And I'm watching them write these ideas. And I'm like, guys, these ideas work for you, but not for this next generation. And literally, I was sitting at a table with a bunch of millennials who were writing down ideas for millennial youth ministry. We had a generation of Gen Zers. Okay, we need to look at it differently because they think differently than millennials. Then literally 2 days later, I'm sitting down with a group of kids pastors and they're talking about Gen Z, Gen Z, Gen Z. And I'm like, stop. Okay, we have got a group called the Alpha Generation. We've got to look at that. So often I think the church gets a little bit behind of where people are actually at. As I mentioned earlier, your young people in your church are not like their parents. They're not like their grandparents. They're not even like the teenagers. These elementary and middle school and soon to be high school students have a different way of looking at life. And so that means we can't keep doing things the same way that we used to. What worked before will not work now. Even the way you do church. I'm going to challenge you, relook at the way you do church, because we've been doing church the same way for over 1,000 years, and we're wondering why we're losing this generation. Well, let's look at it differently. So we know that we need to understand this generation. We spent some time looking at that. Now we need to look at doing things not the way that we've always done them, with some new core values. Now, I believe in the core values of Fresh: family, relationship, experience, safety, and hope. And I believe those are the keys to reaching this next generation, to creating a fresh ministry model. And we go into depth in all of these in our online academy and our Fresh Labs on ministering to preschool and elementary and students. And I would encourage you, if you haven't watched those yet, they're about an hour-long class specifically on each age group that's going to help you roll out a fresh ministry to those kids where they're at right now. And you can find those at www.freshkidmin.org. So let's look specifically today on how we can reach this generation, how we can keep from losing these kids. We've already looked at why we're missing it because we don't completely understand them. Now let's look at how we can impact them accordingly. And let's start with those core values. Let's talk about family. I'm going to give you 3 things that you can do in your church starting right now that will help to impact this generation. The first one is parental involvement. Recognize that the parents of alphas play a significant role in shaping their spiritual development. So offer resources and support and education to parents to help guide them through their children's faith. Now, don't forget, the parents of our alpha generation are Gen Zers and millennials. The Barna has already said is biblically illiterate. That means our parents don't understand this word. They probably haven't read it the whole way through. They're familiar with some basic concepts, but they couldn't even give you a definition of what the word faith means. You need to help these parents raise these kids in godly homes. You need to give them resources, give them things along the way to help them pastor their kids. Number 2, events and activities. Organize events and activities that are family friendly, that cater to the interests of the children and the parents. Don't just do things for parents and have childcare. Don't just do things for kids and make it a drop off. Do activities where they're both engaged, both involved. Make some fun family stuff. Do some games at your church. Go to family amusement parks. Go do things. Get involved in the family's life. And it fosters this sense of community as you have shared experiences. And then families connect with other families as they become part of your church family. Third, get feedback and be willing to adapt. You need to be open to alphas and their parents as far as when they share things, the feedback they give you. Listen to their needs. Adapt your programs and services accordingly. They can provide valuable insights into what best fits this generation. I hope that I never hear that a pastor that watched this says, well, we don't do that. Because that's the quickest way to lose this generation. Instead, your answer should be, tell me more about that. How can we work through this together? Can you give me some ideas? We haven't done this before, but I'm not opposed to having the conversation. Let's be willing to take that feedback, because at any point we get to the point that I don't want to hear it, this is the way that we do it, we've just lost an entire generation. So we've talked about family. Let's move on now to relationship. Let's talk about relationship when it comes to this alpha generation. And I'm going to give you 3 things that will help you here as well. The first one is mentoring and role models. Encourage older members of your congregation to mentor and serve as positive role models for alphas. Interact with the older generation can be a source of wisdom and support for those kids. I like the phrase grandparents. Okay, our kids need grandparents. So when I go to church, there's an older couple that sits in front of us. They're old enough maybe to even be great grandparents to my daughter, but he turns around every day and he jokes with her. Every Sunday he has a conversation with her. My daughter laughs back and they're engaged. My 15-year-old has kind of an adopted grandparent that sits in church with them. We need older mentors and role models to invest in their life. If you've got some of those older veterans that they've worked so hard over the years, and some over the last couple of years they've retired from kids and student ministry and helping young parents, this is a time we need them back. They play a role. There's no retiring. Okay, we go strong all the way to the end. The second one is inclusivity and diversity. We need to emphasize this in our church community. Alphas are growing up in a more diverse world, and they should see those values reflected in your church. It's not a matter of political correctness. It's a matter of New Testament theology. If you look in the book of Acts, after the Holy Spirit was poured out, man, it was all about inclusivity and diversity. Yet somewhere along the line, our Western church has divided itself and started having opinions on people groups and the way people identify themselves and thoughts that they have. And we've got to get over that. We've got to be a church where even our conversation relationally is inclusive and promotes diversity. And thirdly, relationship-wise, and this might surprise you, is digital engagement. Recognize that alphas are digital natives. Okay? They utilize technology and online platforms in everything they do. So you need to utilize it also and engage with them. Develop a user-friendly website. Have a kid look at it and see what they think of your website. Have a young parent look at it and get their insight as well. Your online platforms need to engage those kids. What about your social media? Create online content. Consider virtual events that cater to their preferences. And let me recommend this. Please don't try to copy other people and reproduce everything yourself. You don't have the resources for it. And this generation is just as excited if you share something with them. So you find a great youth pastor out there that's putting stuff online, share that with your students. Let them watch that. You find some fun Christian videos for kids, for students, For young marrieds, share that with them. Hey, check this out. Check out this channel. Check out this person. Follow them. It's going to help you so much in being able to resource them on a digital level. But beyond that, engage them digitally. Send them that text. Send them that note on social media. Okay, be involved in their life. Like their pictures and their comments and the things that they're involved in. Let your students create their own world on digital media that they can talk to each other. Grow accordingly. Family, relationship. Let's talk about experience. Now, the experience now can be daunting to some of our older people that aren't familiar with all of the technology that's out there. Honestly, some of our younger people are still trying to catch up with it. Why? Because technology changes daily. It's constantly evolving. And so some of the ways that we can take our experience and help this alpha generation is through interactive learning. Use multimedia, interactive storytelling, gamification to make the learning experience fun and meaningful for the kids. It's memorable that way. Use screens, use notebooks and iPads, use phones, sound effects, smells, lights. They're used to all these different things going off and triggering their excitement. Use those things in your service. Well, that's not my strength. Okay, find somebody that likes that stuff. Introduce it. Make it part of the experience. Does your church still look like it did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Our kids' world has changed. We need to change as well. Secondly is creative worship. Now I have noticed this from this generation is a lot of these kids are spectators. What does that mean? They would rather watch than be involved. They will be involved if you coax them, but often they just want to watch. I see that constantly when it comes to musical worship. Often we play a song on a track or on a video and we expect the 10, 15, 20, even 50 kids to sing along to it. And we wonder why the boys aren't engaged and the girls are talking to themselves. And as they get older, they're more disconnected. Maybe we need to look at other creative ways to help people worship. Like you can use music, but there's arts. There are other aspects. I mean, the book of Psalms is filled with all kinds of ideas. It can be as simple as come up with some chants. Look at the way other churches, other denominations, even old Jewish traditions worship God. What about prayer stations? Use some of those ideas and make them come to life to those kids. Get creative with the way we do worship. It doesn't have to be 3 songs and sit down. Let's look at other ways that we can worship our God, our Creator, in ways that resonate in their young minds. And the third part of experience will be service and outreach. Involve alphas in community service and outreach projects. This provides kind of a hands-on way to instill core values and a sense of social responsibility. And let me encourage you, do it as a family. Get the whole family involved. It helps you that you don't have to have people overseeing it and volunteers present, and it helps create family connections as well. Get involved in your community. Let's talk about safety for a minute when it comes to reaching this next generation, this alpha generation. I'm going to take kind of a different angle with this, but this is the way their brains think when it comes to safety. Have a safe and inclusive environment. Ensure that your church provides a safe and inclusive environment where alphas feel welcome and accepted. Address issues related to bullying and discrimination. And sometimes you're going to have that hard conversation. Sister Susie May, we can't talk that way. Those words are the new profanity. Those are things that are no longer appropriate to say. Every time you introduce a safety element within your church, you have to train people in the past who didn't do it that way. We need to train our older members of our church that certain things sound like bullying, certain things sound like discrimination, and let's teach them accordingly. And also when it comes to safety, we need to take time to teach online safety and etiquette to our kids and their parents. Both of them are dealing with stuff with online that they've never experienced before. So let's help them, especially when they're using online platforms for religious activities. And finally, let's talk about hope. Family, relationship, experience, safety, and hope. I just want to give you 2 things to help as you share hope with these kids. One is education and technology. Use technology and multimedia tools in religious education. Develop or use apps that are out there, online lessons, educational games that teach spiritual principles in modern ways. There are some great churches out there that have taken some great steps in this that you can use on your phone or your iPad, that you can connect with kids. Let them jump on those apps, play the different games in there, read their Bible digitally. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. Some people think, well, it's not written out, but it's okay. The kids connect that way with it. And secondly, storytelling and the narrative. This alpha generation responds well to storytelling. They watch storytelling all the time. When you get to actually tell them a story, it connects in a new and exciting way. You convey moral and spiritual lessons in a way that captures their imagination as they hear about the hope of Jesus. So reaching this alpha generation, it requires a willingness to adapt and innovate while staying true to the core spiritual values of the church. It's important to remain flexible and open to change as you engage with this generation, to involve their parents and caregivers in the process as you create a fresh ministry. Remember, within the next 5 years, all of these kids are alpha generation. So let's start now. Let's do what we need to do to know your audience, to change what you're doing and meet their needs, and have a fresh set of core values.